He thought the winter in Bozeman, Montana would bring him nothing but silence. But on the third morning, when the snow lay heavy over the backyard, Ranger suddenly froze, then began clawing fiercely at a patch of frozen earth as if something beneath was calling him. John knelt beside the dog and brushed the snow away. One dig, then another, and the ground revealed a curve of deep red metal, the roof of a 1953 Cadillac buried in perfect condition. He had no idea yet that what waited inside would rewrite a forgotten family's history and his own future. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. Snow pressed quietly against the wooden walls as dawn struggled through the pale Montana sky. John Miller, 55, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered face carved by old battles and older grief, stepped out onto the frosted porch of the cabin he now called home. His lean frame carried the stiffness of a man who had spent a lifetime bracing against impact, first on the battlefield, then in the slow war of learning to live alone. His short graying hair caught the faint morning light, and the small scar tracing his jawline tightened each time the cold wind touched it. The scars of loss ran deeper than that one mark. His wife's passing had left him quieter, gentler with the world, but also hollowed in places he rarely let others see. Ranger, his German shepherd, trotted at his side, a 4-year-old with a black saddle marking his back and a chest the color of burnished copper. The dog moved with a disciplined alertness only a trained companion could possess, yet his amber-brown eyes softened each time they flicked toward John, as if understanding every silent ache the man carried. Ranger had been John's constant presence through nights when no sleep would come, through mornings when the house felt too empty. To John, the world felt divided into two parts, before Ranger and after. The cabin itself sat on the edge of Bozeman, a modest wooden structure with a slanted roof that bowed gently beneath winter's weight. Time had worn the boards to a soft gray, but the chimney still carried the faint smell of last night's fire. Around it, the yard stretched wide, dipping into a shallow slope that led toward a scattered grove of pine and birch. Days ago, John had started clearing the snow to make the place feel more like his own, but winter in Montana claimed every open space faster than he could shovel it. As he stepped into the backyard, the crisp air stung his lungs with the sharp purity of cold, the kind of cold that made sound travel strangely. Ranger bounded ahead, nose down, tail stiff, leaving deep paw prints across the untouched blanket of white. John lifted a worn pair of gloves to rub warmth into his hands before taking up the shovel he had leaned against the fence the night before. He didn't mind the work. Physical labor had always been the clearest path out of his thoughts. But today, something felt different. An odd heaviness in the air, a hush that wasn't just about snow or silence. He moved through the yard with deliberate steps, inspecting the ground, noting the way the frost had settled unevenly. Ranger's sudden bark cut sharply through the stillness. The dog froze, ears pointed forward, body taut as a drawn bowstring. John's chest tightened, not with fear, but with a soldier's reflex, a readiness that never truly left him. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though Ranger needed no calming. The dog had fixed himself on a shallow depression near the back fence, a place John had noticed before, but never thought much about. It was the only spot where the snow seemed thinner, melting oddly slower than the rest of the yard. Now, as Ranger lowered his head and sniffed intensely, the hairs along the dog's spine rose. John approached slowly, boots crunching through the crusted snow. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of pine resin and the metallic cold of frozen earth. Ranger let out another bark, a deeper one, more insistent, before digging at the snowdrift with sudden urgency. His powerful paws sent white spray in every direction as he clawed through the crusted surface. Something about the dog's determination, the almost trembling focus, quickened John's heartbeat. He crouched beside him, studying the patch more closely. The ground seemed off, less frozen, less settled. Instinct flickered through him, the same instinct that had once kept him alive under threats far more human. He brushed aside the snow with his gloved hand and felt the soil beneath, packed but strangely warm compared to the rest of the yard. Ranger barked sharply again, pawing harder, more frantic. His claws struck something solid beneath the shallow layer of earth, producing a dull thud that snapped John fully into attention. "What have you found?" John whispered, more to himself than to Ranger. He pushed aside the dog gently and began scraping the ground with the edge of his glove. The soil gave way with unsettling ease. Beneath it, something red glimmered faintly, a curve of metal with a paint color muted by decades. John's breath hitched. He removed more snow, exposing the faint arch of a roofline buried just inches below the surface. Metal, deep red, smooth, not rusted, a shape too deliberate to be debris. Ranger's tail whipped in growing excitement, his paws dancing restlessly around the spot. John swallowed hard. "Ranger, what did you get us into?" He cleared another patch of snow, revealing a wider stretch of curved metal, cold, pristine, impossibly well preserved under the Montana frost. The sight pierced through him like a memory he had never lived, the kind that whispers of stories long buried. His pulse climbed as he brushed the surface, tracing its perfect shape. A car. A whole car, buried beneath his yard. He sat back on his heels, breath fogging the air, mind racing far ahead of logic. Questions stormed through him. How long had it been here? Who would bury a car in perfect condition? And why this exact spot? Snowflakes drifted softly around him, as if the world were intentionally slowing, holding its breath. Ranger let out a low whine, not fear, but recognition that something extraordinary had entered their quiet winter morning. John stood slowly, eyes locked on the red metal glinting beneath the white. A strange mix of dread and wonder twisted inside him, a feeling he hadn't known since his days as a young soldier, stepping toward the unknown. Whatever this was, it hadn't been meant to stay buried forever. And somehow, he knew this was only the beginning. The morning cold clung to the yard as John crouched beside the strange depression, where Ranger had been clawing with frantic purpose, the dog's breath forming sharp little clouds that rose and vanished like warnings carried by the winter air. Ranger, now 7 years old with a powerful frame shaped by years of loyal companionship, moved with a tense, almost instinctive awareness, his black and copper coat bristling as he circled the patch of earth. John watched him, the lines around his eyes tightening. He trusted this dog, more than he trusted most people, and when Ranger stiffened, something was never random. John knelt, remembering how Ranger never behaved this way unless something beneath the surface bothered him deeply. For a moment, he wondered if the dog had picked up the scent of old roots or a half-frozen burrowing animal. But there was a different quality in Ranger's posture that morning, a defensive angle to his stance as if the ground itself hid something meant to stay concealed. John pushed a glove into the soil, and the first scrape of the shovel made Ranger step back, alert and watching. The snow parted easily at first, but beneath it the soil was stubborn, frozen into a rigid crust. John heaved the shovel down again, splitting through a layer of ice that cracked like old glass. Beneath that, the earth broke open more softly, revealing darker, wetter clay. Ranger pressed close, nose twitching almost violently, pawing at the exposed ground. John frowned. Ranger wasn't reacting to an animal. This was something metallic, something old. He shifted aside and dug deeper. The tip of the shovel hit something with a hollow, ringing thud. John froze. Ranger barked sharply, tail stiff. John knelt, brushing away the mud with the back of his glove, and the sun caught something beneath the dirt, a muted gleam, dark red, curved like the line of a long-forgotten memory. He leaned in closer, breath catching in his throat. The surface emerging from the soil wasn't jagged like rusted scrap metal. It was smooth, carefully shaped, and unmistakably automotive. He scraped a wider area, revealing more of the surface. Deep red paint, dulled but not ruined, the roofline forming a graceful arc. John felt something electric run through him. He had spent 20 years maintaining military vehicles. He knew old machines, and he knew craftsmanship. And this had once been luxury. Ranger nosed the edge of the metal and gave a low growl, as if guarding the discovery from unseen threats. John stood, heart pounding, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Ranger or to calm himself. He dug around the curve, widening the area until he uncovered a chrome strip, still gleaming beneath decades of soil. Memories of a younger America flickered through his mind. Tail fins, jukeboxes, wide streets filled with dreams. "This can't be real," he whispered, but it was. The shape continued to grow. Smooth metal, no signs of violence, no dents from a crash, no broken pieces scattered around. Not a scrap heap, not a burial of wreckage. This had been placed intentionally, almost lovingly. When his shovel struck a different angle, John switched to clearing the dirt with his hands, ignoring the cold that bit through his gloves. Bit by bit, the silhouette became undeniable, the unmistakable roofline of a 1953 Cadillac Series 62 convertible, the kind of car that men once saved for, bragged about, and polished every Sunday morning, a symbol of prestige, pride, and prosperity. Ranger circled again, barking toward the open pit as if demanding John understand the importance of what they'd found. The dog lowered his head, sniffing around the edges, pawing at areas John hadn't reached yet, guiding him like a silent partner in a mystery neither of them had expected. But what unsettled John most wasn't the car, it was the condition of it. The doors appeared unforced, the roof uncrushed, no shattered glass, no evidence of decay spreading outward into the soil. Whoever put the vehicle here hadn't discarded it, they had preserved it, sealed it beneath the earth with intention. John pushed back, sitting on the cold ground, heart racing with disbelief. Questions stormed through him. Who buried a pristine Cadillac under a backyard? Why hide something so valuable? Why in perfect condition? And most of all, why here? He looked toward his small cabin, standing pale under the winter sky. It had felt like a refuge when he first arrived, a fresh start after losing his wife. But now, with this discovery emerging from the earth, the land felt older, heavier, filled with stories he hadn't been told. Ranger nudged his hand, sensing his tension, his warm breath grounding John just enough to focus. There was more metal below, more to uncover. John gripped in the shovel again, his breath deepening as curiosity and unease mixed inside him. One thing was clear, Ranger hadn't just found a buried object. He had uncovered the first thread of a secret that someone, long ago, had gone to great lengths to hide. And as John dug deeper into the frozen earth, he knew this discovery was only the beginning. The wind sharpened as the afternoon dipped toward a pale winter dusk, snow clouds bunching low and heavy over the ridgeline behind John's property. The pit he and Ranger had opened now held more color than the entire backyard. Deep crimson metal, dulled by time, but still proud beneath years of frozen earth. John knelt beside the exposed hood of the car, his gloved hands brushing away the final crusts of ice. Ranger stood close, the German shepherd's black and tan coat bristling with a tension John had rarely seen, except during storms or when unfamiliar visitors came too close. At 8 years old, Ranger had the calm, seasoned presence of a veteran dog, thick-chested, amber-eyed, and fiercely bonded to John after the long, lonely years that followed his wife's passing. Now the dog's low growl seemed less like alarm and more like warning, an instinct that something hidden was about to step into the light. John positioned himself near the front latch, fingers stiff from the cold as he eased the old mechanism upward. The hood resisted at first, years of soil clinging to its seams, until it gave with a metallic sigh. Inside, on top of what remained of the engine compartment, sat a small steel lockbox, its surface mottled with rust but otherwise intact. The box looked strangely deliberate, as if someone had placed it there with the intention that it must be found by whoever unearthed the car. John lifted it carefully. It had surprising weight for its size. He carried it into the house, Ranger trailing behind, ears still pinned. The living room was dim, except for the weak light of late afternoon filtering through frosted windows. John set the box onto a wooden table scarred by years of use, and began working the old latch with a thin screwdriver. It took minutes of pressure and a few whispered curses before it finally popped open. Inside lay objects arranged with the precision of a man who cared deeply about what he was leaving behind. A leather-bound journal, its cover worn soft by decades of handling. A ring of keys, each one cleaned and polished long before being locked away. A sealed yellow envelope, edges crisp despite its age. And a small navy velvet box, the kind used for medals or keepsakes. John opened the velvet case first. Inside was a military insignia, a polished unit crest from a World War II infantry division, and beneath it, a black and white photograph of a young man in uniform. The man had sharp cheekbones, a confident smile, and eyes that suggested both pride and the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much. He looked no older than 25. John felt a tug of recognition, not of the man himself, but of the weight he carried. War left shadows on everyone it touched, and even a photograph could hold them. He reached for the journal next. The first page revealed a name written in strong, looping cursive. Henry Calloway, Bozeman, 1955. John read slowly, Ranger lying at his feet as if listening. Henry described coming home from the war with a small savings and a larger determination to build something lasting. He spoke of investing early, of a stroke of luck in a booming post-war market, and of acquiring the Cadillac, the pride of his achievements, a symbol of freedom and hope in a decade hungry for both. But the tone shifted several pages in. Henry's words grew guarded, edged with bitterness. He wrote about family members who saw his success as something to carve apart, brothers who demanded loans, cousins who believed they deserved a share, an older daughter who fought him over inheritance before he had so much as written a will. Only his youngest son, Thomas, a quiet boy with gentle eyes, had shown him genuine love. Then came the line that made John pause. "I have chosen to protect what I've built the only way I know. If they cannot find it, they cannot take it. This car will carry everything meant for Thomas, sealed away until the day I can give it to him myself." John glanced at Ranger, then kept reading, but tragedy followed. Henry recounted the day Thomas was lost in a winter accident in the mountains outside Bozeman. The grief in Henry's handwriting seemed to bleed through the page. In the aftermath, he no longer trusted anyone, not even himself. He buried the Cadillac with its contents on a cold night in 1955, intending to leave it forever. He ended the journal with a final line written in an unsteady hand. "If someone finds this, let it be someone who knows loss, someone who understands why a man hides the last pieces of his heart." John swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every word. Ranger's head nudged his knee softly, as if sensing the shift in his breath. Finally, he opened the yellow envelope. Inside was a single folded letter addressed simply, "To whoever finds my Cadillac." It repeated the essentials from the journal, but added something more. Henry explained that inside the car, beneath the driver's seat, he had hidden bonds and gold bars accumulated after the war. They were never meant for greedy hands, only for his youngest son, or, should fate intervene, for a decent man who finds this in good faith. John stared at the page, absorbing the enormity of what lay beneath his own backyard. He had spent years believing his best days were behind him, that the silence of Bozeman winters was all he had left. Now he realized he had stumbled not just upon history, but upon a man's final wish. As the last light drained from the sky, John closed the letter and looked toward the backyard where the Cadillac slept beneath the snow. The house was quiet, except for Ranger's slow breathing. Yet, in that silence, John sensed something shifting in his life, something vast and waiting. He stood, staring at the frost-clouded window, feeling the weight of a stranger's trust settle over his shoulders like a mantle he had never asked for. And through the growing darkness, a single thought surfaced with startling clarity. If T.P. Henry Calloway had chosen him, then the story was only beginning. The winter light over Bozeman thinned into a pale silver as John Miller stood at his kitchen window, watching the horizon blur behind a soft curtain of snowfall. Ever since uncovering the 1953 Cadillac and the steel box of documents, something in him had shifted. The loneliness that once pressed against his ribs now mingled with responsibility, as though the letter from Henry Calloway had chosen him deliberately. Ranger, his 4-year-old German shepherd with a powerful frame and a black and copper coat, lay by the door as if guarding the house itself. The dog's amber eyes flicked toward every sound, every passing car, every whisper of wind that brushed against the wood siding. John had served long enough to know when pressure was building. Bozeman was a friendly town, but it was also a place where news traveled in straight lines. Quick, simple, and without room for nuance. Within 2 days, people began appearing on the road near his property, slowing their trucks to stare at the blue tarp covering the Cadillac, or whispering to each other at the gas station whenever he walked past. John was used to being invisible, a quiet man with gray-streaked hair, a weathered jawline, and a steady way of looking at the world. Suddenly, he was something else. A man with a secret people wanted. The first knock came at noon. Ranger growled, low and deep, the fur along his spine lifting. John opened the door to find 3 strangers on his porch. The man in front introduced himself as Caleb Mathers, a tall figure in his late 40s, with a square jaw, close-cut blonde hair, and hard blue eyes that seemed to measure John rather than greet him. Caleb wore a wool coat and leather gloves that looked too refined for the Montana winter, as if he wanted everyone to notice he was doing well in life. Behind him stood Elaine Mathers, a thin woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones, auburn hair tied back, and a nervous habit of rubbing her left wrist. The third was Derek, a broad-shouldered younger man with dark stubble, thick eyebrows, and the expression of someone who solved problems with force rather than conversation. Caleb spoke first, voice smooth but carrying an edge. "Mr. Miller, we're here regarding the Cadillac you dug up. We're descendants of Henry Calloway. We want to reclaim what belongs to our family. John studied them carefully, reading posture the way veterans read weather. Caleb's confidence wasn't confidence. It was entitlement. Elaine looked uneasy, as though she wasn't entirely sure she believed the role she was playing. Derek simply stared at Ranger, sizing up whether the dog could be overpowered if things grew tense. John answered with calm firmness. I haven't made any decisions yet. The situation's more complicated than just finding a car. Caleb's smile tightened. Complicated or not, we want access to what's ours. We expect cooperation. Quickly. John felt Ranger step forward slightly, the dog's breath warm against his boot. The strangers flinched just enough to reveal their discomfort. Send proof, John said quietly. If you're truly Calloway's family, you'll have records, documents, birth certificates. Caleb's jaw shifted in irritation. We're not here to argue. We'll be back. They left without shaking hands. Snowflakes swirled in the space where they'd stood, the air colder long after their truck disappeared down the road. That evening, Ranger paced more than usual. The house seemed to absorb the tension, boards creaking sharply with the temperature drop. John sat at the kitchen table, turning Henry's letter in his hands. He thought about the tone, the trust, the sorrow, the paternal hope. He also thought about the greed he had just seen on Caleb's face. Experience had taught him that people weren't dangerous because of what they needed, but because of what they believed they deserved. The next morning, John drove to the courthouse in downtown Bozeman. The clerk who greeted him was Sarah Whitmore, a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked brown hair pinned neatly behind her ears, warm hazel eyes, and a calm, competent way of moving. She wore a burgundy sweater and spoke with the steady patience of someone who handled difficult families for a living. John explained the situation, laying the documents on the desk. Sarah listened intently, occasionally adjusting her reading glasses. Mr. Miller, she finally said, if you want clarity, you'll need DNA verification and a legal ruling. Otherwise, anyone can claim this asset. John nodded. Let's do it. The process took days. Caleb and his group were forced to submit DNA samples after John filed a formal ownership inquiry. The waiting was difficult. Ranger remained on alert, barking at distant engines or the crunch of snow under boots. Twice, John saw a truck parked at the end of his road. Each time, the occupants drove away before he approached. At last, Sarah called. John, the results are in. They're not direct heirs, only distant relatives. They don't qualify for inheritance rights. John exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. At the hearing, the judge, a stern older man with a salt and pepper beard and brows that seemed to disapprove of the world, declared the ruling plainly. The Cadillac and its contents legally belonged to John Miller, the property owner and rightful finder. Caleb's face tightened with fury. Elaine whispered something that sounded like defeat. Derek stared at John with a cold promise. That night, snow drifted in heavy sheets around the house. John sat on the porch with Ranger beside him, watching the tree line darken. He knew the decision didn't end things, not with people like Caleb, but he also knew he would do whatever he must to protect what he had found. And Ranger, ever loyal, stood guard at his side as the winter night thickened around them. The night after the court ruling, John Miller stood on his small wooden porch, watching the frost settle like silver dust across the field behind his home. The tension of the past days still hung inside his chest, but for the first time since unearthing the Cadillac, he felt something close to a steady breath. Ranger sat at his side, the large German shepherd's black and copper coat glinting under the porch light, ears always half tilted as if ready for anything. The dog had been his shadow through it all, through grief, through loneliness, and now through an unexpected rebirth of trouble and possibility. When morning came, the world had softened beneath a fresh layer of powdery snow, and the sharp smell of winter pine drifted through the air. John moved slowly through the house, packing away the old papers and court documents he no longer needed. He touched the Cadillac's keys, a symbol of another man's legacy, and felt something shift deep inside him, a quiet understanding that what had been buried for 70 years had finally found the right hands. 2 weeks later, the annual Montana Heritage Classic Car Auction filled the Bozeman Events Center with crowds wrapped in long coats and wool scarves. Collectors roamed the floor with practiced eyes, scanning polished chrome and glossy hoods. John arrived with Ranger, who trotted beside him with a calm, confident gait. Though most of the auction-goers wore tailored jackets and designer boots, John stood out in his worn gray plaid shirt, faded jeans, and a face carved by years of wind, war, and the weight of starting over. Yet there was a steadiness in him that made people treat him with an unexpected respect. A man named Everett Langley, a tall, sharply dressed appraiser in his early 60s, with sleek silver hair and a narrow, observant face, greeted John with a firm handshake. Everett was known throughout the region, a former engineer with meticulous habits and an almost intimidating passion for preserving classic American automobiles. His voice carried a calm authority when he spoke. "I've reviewed your Cadillac, Mr. Miller. To find one in this condition, untouched, unmodified, it's extraordinary. I'll be honest with you, there will be a bidding war today." John nodded, though his stomach tightened slightly. He had never been to an auction in his life, let alone one where people might fight over something he dug out of the earth with his own hands. Ranger pressed his head gently against John's hip, grounding him. When the bidding began, the room changed. Once calm conversations fell into silence as the auctioneer lifted the microphone. The red 1953 Cadillac sat under bright stage lights, gleaming like a ruby pulled from time itself. Its chrome trim shone despite the decades underground. Everett Langley stood near the front row, his expression unreadable but focused entirely on the car. The auctioneer, a middle-aged woman named Linda Bray with fiery red hair and a commanding voice honed from 20 years of calling prices, signaled for the room's attention. "We open at 300,000. Do I have 300? 300, 350, 400, 450. The numbers climbed, sharp and rhythmic. John's pulse quickened, and Ranger's tail swished slowly, sensing the rising energy of the crowd. $500,000, 800,000, 1 million. Everett finally lifted his hand at one point, voice steady and decisive. 1,100,000. A rival bidder countered immediately. Everett raised again. Silence followed, deep, heavy, anticipatory. Linda slammed the gavel. "Sold! $1,200,000 to Mr. Langley." Applause rolled across the room like a long breath finally released. Everett approached John afterward, extending his hand once more. "That car will be restored with absolute care," he said sincerely. "And its story will never be forgotten." John believed him. And for the first time, the full weight of what he had carried seemed to lift. Within a month, the payment cleared, and John used the money the way a man with experience, humility, and quiet scars would. He hired a local contractor, Mason Riley, a bearded and broad-shouldered craftsman with kind hazel eyes and a reputation for doing honest work. To rebuild the insulation, repair the foundation, weatherproof the walls, and restore the old wooden house into a warm sanctuary against the harsh Montana winters. Mason, who had lost his brother in the service years before, worked with a quiet respect toward John, often pausing to scratch Ranger behind the ears and whisper, "Good boy, you found a miracle, didn't you?" John also filed the paperwork to establish the Henry Callaway Scholarship, a yearly fund for students at Bozeman High School who showed integrity, curiosity, or the kind of quiet determination Henry once hoped for in his own child. The act felt right, as though the story had come full circle. With the remaining money, John funded a community playground near the center of town, a simple, sturdy place where families could gather, where laughter could ring in a town that had seen more than its share of silent winters. Ranger, meanwhile, enjoyed the quiet luxury of a new insulated doghouse, handcrafted by Mason himself, complete with a heated floor pad and a wide awning to shield him from the snow. He still preferred curling up beside John's bed each night, but the gift made everyone smile. One evening, as the final repairs wrapped up and the last of the playground equipment was installed, John stood on his porch again. The sky above Bozeman glowed faintly lavender, the first flakes of a gentle snowfall drifting down like whispered blessings. Ranger nudged his hand, tail thumping softly. John looked over the yard where so much had changed, where loss had met discovery, where a buried past had become a new future. "You found it," he whispered to Ranger, "and somehow it found us too." In that moment, beneath the quiet snow, John felt a sense of purpose return, warm, steady, alive, something he hadn't felt since losing his wife. And the winter no longer seemed so silent, because now it finally had a voice. In a quiet corner of Bozeman, where winter snow softens even the hardest memories, John Miller learned something many of us forget too easily, that sometimes the blessings we need the most arrive in the smallest, most unexpected ways. A loyal dog scratching at the frozen earth, a whisper of intuition we can't explain, a moment that feels guided by a hand far wiser than ours. Some call it instinct, some call it luck. But for those who believe, it is often the quiet work of God, reminding us that new purpose can rise even from the coldest seasons of life. And just like John, we too may discover that the things buried deepest, hope, courage, faith, are never truly lost. They're simply waiting for the right moment to be found. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that miracles still happen in the middle of ordinary days. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and may God bless you and your family with warmth, protection, and gentle guidance. Please support us by subscribing to the channel.